Well, hey, folks. Thank you for joining us for a Friday Night Live with Strong Roots Resources. And I've got a new friend here with me tonight. I'll introduce her here in just a second. Uh, we're going to be going over the East Tennessee Homestead Alliance Festival. I don't think I'm going to get into a whole lot of farm news tonight. There's not a whole lot of anything new to announce aside from trying not to die of heat stroke. And we're just going to kind of catch up from the week. It looks like we got Margot in the chat. Thank you for stopping in, Margot. Whoever else shows up, feel free to pose your questions and we'll address them. So I've got with me here tonight Miss Alana Bliss. She is a fellow designer and another just nature-minded, eco-minded person, and we found ourselves having an extended conversation over at the festival last weekend, and quickly realized that it needed to be shared with more than just the two of us. So I'm gonna unmute her mic here real quick and let her introduce herself, and we'll rock and roll. So
Hi.
Thank you, Alana. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Beautiful. Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, my name is Alana Bliss. I have been a permaculturalist for almost 20 years and multiple climates. I learned in the desert, then we had a farm and education center in Costa Rica for some years, and then had up in Minnesota, we had a design and installation business, and now we're here in Tennessee and working on We've got a little community, about 4 families. We're 9 children and 8 adults, and we've been here for about a year and a half. And I've got 5 kids, and we have a farm and forest school, and just trying to live the life, regenerative culture, and we also have a regenerative fellowship. We call it a regenerative life fellowship, which is our kind of more spiritual stuff. But yeah, it's great to be here, and I'm really excited for this conversation.
So you guys have quite the operation going over there, from what it sounds like to me. And the only problem I see is that we just got to get the word out to more people. Because for those who don't know, I had been seeing posts and things and events and whatnot, classes that Alana had been sharing in our local regenerative groups and forums and whatnot, and we had just not had the opportunity to meet face to face. So we definitely want to make sure more folks know about what she's got going on this end of the state, which is just a little bit east of me. And so the bulk of the conversation I think we're going to have tonight is about somebody who is not from this area integrating themselves into the culture, Southern culture, Tennessee culture, what she's observed, and how she's looking forward to contributing. And I know there's been a lot of, with the way the state population is growing, there has been a lot of tension. And so we had a discussion of maybe what's the right way to go about doing this. So Alana, go ahead and just kind of open up with your thoughts on what your all's experiences have been as somebody who has been all over the place to settling into East Tennessee, and what that's been like.
Yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, I had the experience in Costa Rica being a foreigner. And so that is extremely drastic. I don't see it as intense here at the moment, thankfully. But in Costa Rica, there was a very strong feeling of like an upper class and a lower class kind of energy, right? Where like the foreigners coming in are coming from a different economy. They just have more money, even if they didn't where they came from. And then they're coming into, or we came into a culture that was making $2-3 an hour on average. And they wanted, to support, like we wanted to support the local economy, and the people that were there wanted to work. And so there becomes automatically this kind of working class that happens. And a lot of folks don't learn the culture, they don't learn the language, and they just kind of have these surface level relationships with locals. And if that weren't bad enough, then you have people buying up land and raising the prices on things. Taxes go up, just the price of selling to another foreigner versus a local. One example of that, even not even buying stuff, but an example is I was talking to a local Costa Rican, and she was complaining about how some I think it was Israeli, but some foreigner had come in and was like posting on kind of like the local Craigslist that they could afford to pay like $2,000 a month for rent in a country that rent is generally 300 to 400. And so anyone seeing that is going to go, oh, wow, I can get that for rent. Like, that's amazing. So it pushes the market up and it makes it unaffordable for locals there. So there was a lot of resentment from that. And so I'm seeing too, because here there's a lot of people moving, and so I don't know how long that trend has been going, but definitely from 2020 till now, I imagine there's a big movement. And as a result, there's this kind of disconnect. And so I think it's really important for us to just, first of all, acknowledge that. And second of all, ask questions about how can we have mutually beneficial relationships supporting, instead of coming in with this like idea of making things different. For example, in Costa Rica, you have all these permaculturalists and regenerative ag people coming in and saying, you should do it like this, and you should do it like that, and don't use this and don't use that, and no market to sell to, but hey, no import that. It's okay. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm telling you to go organic and I'm not giving you an option. I said, you can find one though. It just wasn't working. And the people would shut down and they'd be like, why would I even talk to you? You're so arrogant, versus when I would come in, I wouldn't say anything about any of that. I just say, wow, your mango trees look good, or your gardens are looking great. What do you do? Or what did, and then if they say something about fertilizer, I say, well, do you know what your grandpa did? Is that like, is this better or worse? Or just asking, qualifying questions, and not telling them what to do at all, but just going back to our farm and doing something. And my greatest compliment was to have the swales that I built. I walked over to the coffee field next to us and saw that they had done the same thing, just by watching. And so anyway, so that's some examples.
It sounds like when you arrive in a culture that's not your own, bringing forth even just a little bit of genuine humility can get you settled in much faster. Would you say that was an accurate assessment for your experience down there?
Definitely. I think being humble in general is an attribute and virtue that is vital to harmony in any environment. And especially when you're coming into somebody else's culture, someone else's home. I mean, that's something to think about. We, oftentimes we think like, well, I'm a global citizen, or I'm like, I can go wherever, but like, there's a lot to it before you got there. And it's important to honor the culture and like the people and the traditions and the land, I think.
Yeah. When you were in Costa Rica, if you were to ask somebody about maybe the history of that area or the history of their family, did they receive that question well, or was it off-putting to them, or perhaps it was a mixed bag? What was your experience with that?
I would say you don't lead with it. Okay. What we would do is just cultivate a relationship. And, it's interesting. I was a part of this colonial group, this like colonial consciousness group that was kind of dissecting what is the colonial mind. And one of the things that was a really powerful takeaway for me was this idea that when the indigenous mind comes across something new, it thinks, how can I build a relationship with this? That when the colonial mind comes across something new, it thinks, what can I get out of this? And that switch, just that little switch, and we all have it, because we grew up in a colonial culture, most of us. I shouldn't say all, but most of us. And so for me, I would try to check myself when I was coming across something new. I would think, am I being authentic in this? Am I coming at it with a colonial mindset? So I think that's really big. Building relationships first and foremost is essential, and so like in Costa Rica, it's the part of the culture is to bring a gift, and so when you go to someone's house, you just stop in, that's just how it is. You just stop in, you got a gift, you share it, and then you start talking about small things, build relationships, ask how they're doing. And then, I mean, for me, I was stumbling through even speaking because I didn't speak Spanish. And so first it was understanding what the heck are we saying in the first place. But yeah, I wouldn't lead with like asking about someone's history necessarily unless it felt like the right thing to do. I think empathy and like being sensitive to what's happening with the energetics, like you can tell if someone's like open, they're more relaxed. If someone's starting to get more offended or they're not comfortable, they're gonna get more tense. So yeah, but I think in general they were open to it in Costa Rica because they were excited to share. And sometimes the stories were hard to hear, sad, and sometimes they were really inspiring. It just depended.
I asked the question because it's been my experience here as a as a native Tennessean that if somebody new to the area shows interest in our heritage, even kind of right off the bat, to me that's a good sign.
Oh, good.
That's and that's just me personally because every time we have our gatherings up here, our open house events, I always lead with, um, I have this land because my great grandfather bought it in the 30s. Now, without a doubt, there are most certainly people who were on this land prior to that, including indigenous peoples. But I don't have access to a lot of that history. It didn't. I have access to it. I haven't been able to find much accuracy as far as I know.
Right.
But it means a lot to me personally as a Southerner and somebody who really cares a lot about Tennessee and Southern culture that that we acknowledge that people acknowledge where we came from and the efforts that were put forth to get us to where we're at.
Yeah, definitely.
So I would generally say, if you were to open up conversations with your neighbors where you are now, um, most people would be happy to share uh, things like family recipes or a certain story about maybe a tree or a spring or some other landscape feature out that way. So I was just kind of curious about that from a cultural perspective.
Yeah, that's great to know because I think it is a place where it's really an easy, if that's something that's welcome, then it's an easy entry into understanding. Because we, you know, when, for example, around history, from Minnesota, you hear stories of like racism or things like that. And my older boys are mixed, so I used to be, I was when we first came, I was nervous about that, especially seeing the rebel flags, and I'd be like, oh, does this mean my child's in danger, right? And because in Minnesota there isn't a history of that, so those flags really are representing, oftentimes, unless someone moved up there, they're generally representing more racism. And so when it came here, I was nervous about that. And my son, who's in school, because he was like, the condition of coming down here was he had to go to public school. He's 17. And so he get really integrated early because of that, right? So he just knows the kids who are local in the county school. And he's the one who told me, he said, that's heritage, not hate. And that, for him to say that to me right away, like when he learned about it, was like so beautiful. And I was like, wow, look at these assumptions I'm coming with, because I think that's really important. We all have them. We all have our preconceived notions and assumptions of places and cultures that we don't even understand. And sometimes we don't recognize them until they come up in those situations. And so for me, that was awesome. Even though there may be things here and there anywhere that I could assume things. I could assume things about, but when you can start opening up and being really like inquisitive and interested, then those things start to flush out, and you realize our humanity is a lot more, like, we are a lot more in common than we're not, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that you and I kind of brought up last weekend was, we have both had lots of conversations with lots of different types of people as a part of designing properties, and I have visited people who land on a wide bit of the spectrum from we could say very far left leaning to very far right leaning, and then all kinds of blends in between that, and people who are apolitical 100%, don't care, just want to be left alone. But all they really do have in common is they want to um, have their families feel safe, experience abundance, have the opportunity to earn a good living, to work with the land, um, and it's I mean it's reliably consistent. I have yet to run into anybody who it says they're making it their primary mission to make somebody else's life very difficult in one form or another.
Yeah.
So I think that's good for us to keep in mind, just as a society, because given events of the last week here or so, it kind of looks like to me they're trying to kick off yet another way to divide society. Is kind of how it appears to me.
Oh yeah, big time. And I think there's the ancient art of agreeing to disagree that we have forgotten as a society. And that's like, you know, I mean, would you rather be right or would you rather be in harmony? And I think that's a big question because, you know, we are all subjective, right? We can try to be objective, and that's a great skill, but inherently we are living in an experience that is subjective. And so our point of view, I like the metaphor where you have like a book. You can hold up the book and one side is blue and the other side is red. And I'm seeing the blue and you're seeing the red and I'm yelling, it's blue. And you're like, no, it's red. And like we go back and forth. We're both right. You know, it's all about your perspective, right? So being able to like agree to disagree and find the stuff that you actually do have in common and like work with those things versus fixate on the things that you don't have in common, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And perhaps some people are just more easily, triggered by certain phrases or terminology or what have you. And I think we've all got a duty to address those personal triggers and not drag them out into and make a mess of it for everybody else like that. I kind of think I'm real big on personal responsibility, and when we were talking, I kind of got the impression you were as well,
Yeah.
which is personally I think the way to go. I think we need to take care of our own stuff. It's our duty as humans. But so since you guys have been out on your end of the state, just kind of give me a little overview of what that experience has been like.
Yeah. So we started out in Greenville and then moved out to Bean Station, which is where we are now. And Bean Station, like I said, I get geeked out on the history. I'm like, I want to know what this place is. This is a funny name. Why is it called that? You know? And so what happened was Bean Station was started by William Bean as a trading post and area, like where it became a town. And it used to be really big. And when the TVA flooded the Cherokee Lake, the whole town went under water, right? And so, and there was a lot of conflict in the town itself around whether they would get the money to buy it out, what price would they sell land at, and they ended up not coming to any conclusion and losing a lot. And so there's a lot of this loss feeling in this area because literally their lands were taken by the water, and for better or worse, it is what it is, right? And
Yes.
So that created kind of like a poverty consciousness in certain areas, like where we live specifically. It was called Poor Valley, and the people here, I think they might have been displaced by the dam, and so there was a lot more of this like kind of feeling of desolation and frustration, and then people turned to drugs, and so that's where a lot of the people that we've met in the area, when we talk about where we live, they're like, oh yeah, that area, like that was bad, and it was dangerous. And so, you know, now it's not where we are because what happened was someone came and bought 600 acres in the valley that we were in, and he subdivided out different lots and sold it to foreigners, or not foreigners, transplants, whatever you want to call us, folks not from around here.
Not from around here.
And so it's shifted the culture of this road. We're on a 2-mile road, 1-lane road coming in, and there's like people who just want to be living and left alone, and they're kind of more the homesteader kind of people out here. So it's interesting to see this shift, but they're very kind. Like people look out for each other on the area, and then also Morristown. So when Bean Station flooded, Morristown became the biggest city nearby, and of course it grew as a result. And Morristown also, I learned a bit about the history here, is that when there's a lot of factories here, so it's factory work, and then there's also Granger County is known for its tomatoes, so there's a lot of migrant workers too, and there's a lot of Mexican migrant workers that came up, and so what ended up happening is Morristown became a very diverse, not very diverse, but there's a lot of Latinos here. And so like I can't remember what percentage, but it's one of the higher percentage towns in the area. And so as a result of that, being that I speak Spanish, I love that. And I'm like walking around talking to folks and learning their stories and hearing about how they're here for a certain amount of time or whatever, working in the factories. And there was a displacement of people of color that were here, like Black folks that were here, and because when the Mexican workers came, they took a smaller amount of the pay that they were willing to have was less, and so it kind of pushed out the African American community, and then so there was some animosity around that, which I wasn't expecting, but my son has experienced actually more racism from the Mexican kids than from the white kids, and so those things kind of, you don't think about those things, but they're all like different elements of how people interact. So like in school, my son goes to Granger High. It's like a county school, and it's like 98% white, and the rest of it's pretty much Mexican. And he said the first day, one of the boys came up to him and was like, "I don't like black people. We don't have a problem. You stick to you. You stay on your side. I'll stay on mine. I'm not going to harass you, but I'm not going to be your friend." And my son was like, "Okay, fair. Like, I get it. That's where you're at." Like, but then he became friends with some of these Latino kids, and they were friends, but they would call him names and make him feel othered and kind of talk down to him, and in like a playful kind of way. And so that was kind of tough. And it was interesting because we weren't expecting it at all. So, but we realized later why this was happening is because of the race. They were feeling like, there's this energy around Latinos where people are like taking our jobs, and it might be true in certain cases that's happening, and so then there's like energy of frustration towards them, and then they turn around and give it to someone else. And so it's been interesting, but that's a lot. Like for me, that's more the culture I've interfaced with here, is a lot of Latinos from like Mexico or Guatemala or whatnot. And then the local folks that I talk to here are the ones that the people in my neighborhood, a lot of them are transplants, and the people from here I really haven't connected with as many in this specific neighborhood, just because I haven't met as many people from this specific area, because I think all of that upheaval between the dam and like people in migrant communities moving in and out, and then with this valley, there's a lot of meth, and the people that were doing it were burning houses and ended up in jail, or prison. And so that's very unfortunate that happened too, because it's really sad how people are losing their land as a result of all kinds of things, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's most definitely in all cultures kind of a human pecking order, and I'm not sure that is ever really going to change. I watch a lot of Star Trek, and because I'm a geek and a nerd on top of it all, and this future that Gene Roddenberry envisioned, where there is no such thing as, where it's like a uni-race thing, like there's no distinction between, and yet there is, because they introduce all these other alien cultures and they bring these very questions back into play. So it's like the humans are a uni-race, but now we've got all of these other cultures and people, and we're gonna find conflict there. So I feel for your son experiencing that. And I'm sure, as a parent, you must have experienced some frustration and some concern over that. But I guess it doesn't surprise me to hear that. It is there. Like I pick up on a lot of those similar tensions. When I was still full time on the ambulance, we have a pretty sizable Latino, especially like the Central American folks who are coming up here for work, and they are very protective of each other, and like they won't throw one of their somebody they have that in common with. They won't throw them under the bus for if it was like a DUI or somebody got stabbed or whatever. It was like the guy who he knew who stabbed him, and he wasn't going to say who it was because it was just a dispute over a lady or something like that. So they just have a culture that we may not know the intricacies of, and perhaps they want to keep it that way. So I don't know that I've ever really solidified my personal feelings on the topic, because nobody who is a a different race than me has ever interfered in my ability to live a happy life. So I therefore cannot really get my knickers in a twist over it. It would just be like a theoretical thing that I would concern myself with. Um, so uh, there's kind of a saying that I can't remember who told me this, but in the South, it that you as a transplant will be probably always considered an outsider, and your kids will probably be considered an outsider, but your grandchildren will be accepted. So they're saying it takes 2 to 3 generations to kind of be folded into the community. Um, if you wanted to expedite that process a little bit, how do you think you could go about it to kind of not just keep the peace, but to actually feel like you're integrating yourself and your family into the local culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, I don't know for sure because I've never actually been able to do that. In Costa Rica, there's an interesting vibe where you have all of the foreigners getting together and talking and hanging out, and there's a kind of similar feel what we were talking about around the, um, you know, standing. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, and the community is really tight knit. That happens in any country, anytime there's people that speak a certain language together or share a certain culture. It kind of happens that way. So I can understand that. But I would say if I wanted to integrate in quicker, I would really want to learn about the culture and about like just values and morals around what do people value here, in this region, wherever we are, and in the South. Like it's so different. I mean, Minnesota, I remember the first time when I was in South Carolina, I visited areas that had been at war, and I'd never seen that. In Minnesota, there aren't like active areas that were literally fighting. There were people who were literally dying and fighting. I mean, yes, there was with indigenous people. I shouldn't say that there weren't any, but they're not memorialized. And you don't hear the stories of that as much. A little bit, but it's usually quiet, you know. So coming down to the South, there's this full on in your kind of, I don't want to say it's in your face, but it's definitely more present in the culture around there was a battle here. And there was actually like, something that isn't that far back in history that we can remember where there was a division. And so that's something that has its own, I don't want to, it's got its own energy. And so it's something to understand and learn more about, I think. And then, so that could be part of the culture in the past. And I guess that's part of that, the Confederate flag, and not being all judgmental and woke and getting angry because someone's doing something that I don't understand or agree with. I think then also like just asking questions about cooking, about, like you said, family recipes, like land stewardship, building relationships with people, not surface relationships, but actual deep friendships, where you're like welcoming people in to your home and connecting and vice versa, I think that's a good way to do it. Maybe also understanding the economy and finding out what the needs of people are and like supporting those needs, not your own, but like understanding what are the needs of the overall community and what can I bring to show that I'm here to serve the higher good. And I think that could help integration more too, because when you are considered a valuable part of a culture or society, then you're going to be brought in quicker, Like when I go back to Costa Rica, they call me Alana de antes, which is like the Alana from before, and they're like, oh, no, you're not a gringa. Like, you're not a locust, but like, and so it's because I had built these relationships. I cared to understand the culture and I cared to understand, thank you, what people were experiencing. And I'd ask questions like, what was it like before electricity? And I remember my neighbor, he smiles and looks up with this nostalgic face and he says, oh, those were the days of abundance. And I thought to myself, wow. And what about now? I said, and then what about now after electricity? And he goes, the days of debt. And I was thinking about that. I was like, well, why don't you go back to the days of abundance? And he goes, well, once you get technology, you can't go back. It's addicting. It's like you need the next thing. And so he's like, it's not really an option to go back. And I was, wow. Right.
That's it. That's interesting. That kind of brings up a lot of people in the homesteading space. We hear phrases like we're going back to the land, we're returning to the land, where we're going for traditional skills. and a lot of us are. And I know people who are using a scythe to cut their own hay. I have a friend, a buddy who does it, and that's how he puts up his hay for his small flock of sheep. And but that's a really good point, and I'm not sure I've pondered it from that angle. We, a lot of us are purposefully choosing a more difficult and complicated way of life. I actually don't think it's simple. My life is actually rather complicated, keeping all these things, juggling all this stuff. Going to a 9 to 5 is simple in my book. And we have a lot of technology available to us now that eases that stuff, that helps with planning and understanding and research and just the ability to communicate the way we do now is huge. I can get an answer to a complex question. I can touch base with dozens of people quickly and readily to if I have kind of a timely question or something of the sort. So yeah, the gentleman who told you that's something certainly worth pondering. Because unless something goes real sideways and the internet turns off tomorrow, we're probably just going to kind of keep plugging along and using technology as much as any other tool with what we do.
It's true. And I mean, it's something as simple as washing your clothes. In Costa Rica, the washing machines are semi-automatic, right? So you put it in, you put the clothes in there, you turn on the hose, and then you let it fill, but you have to make sure that it's not draining, right? So you turn it to fill, you wait some more, you wait a little longer, and then you turn off the hose, and then you put your soap in and you close it, and you turn on the timer, and it like agitates the water for a while, but don't go too far because you have to drain it, and then you have to add water again, and then you have to turn on the agitator yet again and like rinse it, and and then after that you have to put it into the spinner, and it's like, I remember I came back, and if you don't stay there, you forget. You're like, laundry, one load takes you all day because you were like getting caught up in all the other things. And it's like, I moved back to the States and I put my clothes in the washing machine and I was like, I just pressed the button. And they're like, yeah. I was like, that's it. And I don't have to like stay here, And it's like, so even with the technology like that, there's so many levels. And that was the technology that they were like longing for, even though it was it's easier than like hand washing all your clothes, right? Even though it might have been more efficient, I don't know. But it's like the technology that we take for granted, your water, where is it coming from? Your gray water, your black water, your electricity, your internet. There's all these different things that we have that we kind of just take for granted in our society. And I think that, it's not an either or. Like, sure, you can get back to the land and you can go use, like I have a friend in Costa Rica who recently passed, but he built his entire house with no power tools, and it was a gorgeous house. It was cobbed and it was so pretty, and he, was dedicated to that life. He rode horses everywhere, and he literally did integrate back into the culture in a really powerful way. He was from Spain originally, but he was raised in like Africa, so he was very, very unique and cool. But like most of us aren't trying to do that to the degree that he did. We're trying to stay connected, like with the internet and these kinds of conversations. And we're trying to like, make ripples to help be better, the earth to be better, our culture to be better, whatever it is. And so I think it's kind of a hybrid, so that means we got to still like work and make money and do all the things to keep our technology and maybe our debt, it's like, it's riding that line. That's that transition ethic, right? In permaculture, you've got your earth care, people care, your fair share, which I also consider into the future, what future generations are going to get. How can I make the land more fertile so that they're going to get more than what I got? And then transition. It's like we're in this time of technology, and I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, sure, there could be some huge economic collapse and we're back in like Depression era life and there isn't an internet or something like that. But even then, I think humanity will work towards getting it back, and so it's this, it's about that middle path.
Yeah, I agree. I wanted to do my duty as a Southerner to introduce you to a couple of songs that you may find interesting regarding the development of TVA dams.
Yeah.
So Are you familiar with a singer-songwriter named Jason Isbell?
No, I'm really not very cool.
Okay, well, this is okay. And all you have to do is listen to two different songs. So Jason Isbell, and I'm not real sure which song came out first, but they were in the same era. I mean, within a few years of each other. Jason Isbell wrote a song when he was actually a member of the Drive-By Truckers, and the name of the song is "Thank God for the TVA," and his song is a positive take on, um, you know, TVA providing jobs, creating these lakes slash reservoirs where people go and fish and boat and recreate and all this kind of stuff.
And have electricity. I mean, that's where we get our electricity from.
And have electricity, yes. So there's that. And then the Drive-By Truckers wrote a song. So he was a member of that band for a while, and then he went off and did his own thing. The Drive-By Truckers wrote a song titled "Uncle Frank." And it tells the story of Uncle Frank, who he basically works his ass off his whole life to get a little piece of land to spend the rest of his life on. And it's a wonderful story, but it basically talks about Uncle Frank, his land flooding from the development of the dams. And so I highly suggest listening to both of those songs sometime, because it'll kind of give you more than just a tidbit of those guys are really tapped into Southern culture, especially their earlier stuff. So I just and for the audience too, look those guys up. I'm not as crazy about their newer music, but their stuff through the 90s and the early 2000s, really, really good storytelling about Southern culture trying to make itself better without losing where it came from. Lots of complexity. So just leave that out there for people to consider.
Thank you.
And to this day, you're going to find people who have nothing good to say about TVA, all forms of it. And then you've got and then there's the other side of it. There's a side where men who couldn't find really good paying work found good paying work working for the authority, and were able to provide better for the families and that sort of thing. It picked up TVA. It picked up a lot of slack when the coal economy began to crash. A lot of those men switched to working for TVA. So it's that kind of ever, those scales back and forth, just like anything. And there's even a line in an Alabama song talking about basically Roosevelt's program of starting the system of dams and losing the farm, but winding up with more money just the same. So it's interesting.
Thank you for sharing that. It is really interesting, because it's a topic that it does have a lot of energy on both sides. I mean, you've got this whole movement of like green energy, and the dams are, green energy, and so it's like that's one of the solutions to problems with like dirtier energy sources.
Yeah.
But then you have your ecosystem issues and how they manage it. And I mean, there's in Greenville, when you drive by one of the dams, it's just broken. It doesn't work. I don't know. It's abandoned. I'm not sure. But, it's interesting. I think that part of that history is really cool to understand. And I think, for better or worse, it exists, right? And so it's funny. The first time I came across that was, Oh, Brother, Where Art Thou? You remember that? Do you ever see that movie? And they're like, he's like trying to get there before it floods. And you think about that, like in real time, like trying to get your stuff out of somewhere that is going to be gone soon. And they say over in Cherokee that there's buildings and stuff from being stationed that you could go scuba dive and see.
Yeah. I mean, I just remember being a little kid, and, we were always out on the lakes. And to me, it never occurred to me until I was older. I'm like, why in the world is there a silo rising up out of the water? I just didn't know at the time. And I think I asked my grandmother, and she was like, well, they flooded it when they built the dam. And then I ended up doing like a whole research project for it when I was in high school, because I found it fascinating. It just goes to show that, sometimes you can't get out of the way of the march of so-called progress.
Yeah.
And I could only imagine what that would be like. I mean, we had a sizable chunk of the portion of our lower property on the roadside um, taken. I mean, they paid for it, but we lost it when they 4-laned the highway down there back in the late 90s. And that was kind of when that happened. So I don't really remember exactly when. That would have been maybe 95, 96, somewhere around in there. And I remember talking to my grandmother about it, and she was like, they can just do that. They can decide it's for the greater good.
Eminent domain.
Eminent domain.
Yeah.
And then that happened. And then what took me straight down Anarchy Lane as a teenager was same road, 1/4 of a mile to the west was my great grandmother's house, beautiful stone house, craftsman style house. And that house was torn down, not so they could 4-lane the road, but because on the opposite side of the road there were soccer fields, and the soccer people had enough lobbying power, they didn't want their field cut into, and so they tore down this house instead. This is a house, I still have photos of it. This is the house where we held family reunions many years ago, years in a row for my dad's side of the family, my grandmother's side of the family. And that was beyond heartbreaking for me as a little kid. And I can't imagine how my grandmother felt at the time. And when I realized that could happen, I was kind of done at that point. I'm like, oh, so it's not about taking care of people. It's about taking what you want. And to me, like things like that, you can't put a price on.
No, it's true. It's like, I mean, there's that song, My Dirt. I don't know if you heard of it. It's this country song that I just recently heard, and I kind of fell in love with the song. But it's about that, like, this developer pulls up to this guy's house and he's like, you think you could sell it? And he's like, no, this is my dirt. These are my fields. I harvest what I sow. Like, see that barn? I built it with my 2 hands. I raised my babies here. It's not worth any. He's like, there's no greenback dollar that's worth it, right? He's like, you can't put a price on it. They're going to bury me in this dirt when I go. It's like, yeah, it's your blood, sweat, and tears. And for him, he's talking like what you got, like ancestor homes. Like, this is my great grandparents, bought this land. And he goes, I hate to be the first to sell, and it's like, and that's what I was telling the Costa Ricans when I was down there. I was like, don't sell your farm. I don't care how much they tell you, because you're going to end up in the city, have no land to pass down to your grandkids, and your money's going to go. It goes fast, y'all. Like, you see all these people that are stuck because they sold their land, and sure, it's like extremely tempting to sell it at a high price, especially when the prices go high, and the people are like, they've never seen it that high, and they're like, well, what could I do? And meanwhile, the coffee harvest is struggling for lack of rain, and the cows are sick for lack of grass, and whatever they're going through, struggling with the farm life. It's hard, but when you find a way that works, you got to stick with it. But that's the thing. I feel like our society, people are getting so lazy, like the hard work, like that whole song starts off with, he had hard work caked on his overalls, and it's like that's something that I didn't get to experience. I mean, sure, chores around the house, but like actually being on land and having a relationship with my food and having a relationship with the land in a way that wasn't just observing it. It's like, I don't know, it's really powerful. And I think that that's part of our human need, is that we actually have to have those things. And when we don't, we kind of go a little crazy. I think we get a little lost.
I think you're completely correct. And that's incredibly well stated. I think that's why a lot of people are as out of sorts as they are right now, because they are disconnected from so many things. And I don't even think they realize that they're disconnected.
Yeah. It's true.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say also, growing up, like you have, or in the media and stuff, you have this idea that these food deserts are only in cities, that they're predominantly in cities. Well, where there's public transportation and you can actually get around. But then when I got here, I learned, actually, no, like there's a lot of food deserts out here in the rural communities. And it didn't make sense, because I was like, but there's land to grow food on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but the culture is no longer like the kids aren't learning it. The parents aren't teaching it. Maybe their parents didn't, and it's like, or maybe you can get cheaper food from Dollar General. It's like we're with
Plenty
is
of
it
those out in the country. Yeah.
yeah, it's sad. I mean, you don't hear that. You don't think about that. And there's no public transportation, to get you from point, maybe I shouldn't say no, very little, if any, to
Yeah.
get you from your house to the store. And then when you get there, now Dollar General's got like a little produce section. So I guess it's not a food desert anymore. But
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that is something that there's kind of a joke. It's like there's a little meme about it'll show some nice little field, little acre field somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and the next thing you know, there's a Dollar General on it. There'll be nothing else around.
yeah.
Um, but that is the thing. I mean, they certainly recognize oh, it's been 5 miles and no Dollar General store. That's why I don't worry about going. If I take off in the middle of nowhere to go to a consult or something, I know I'm going to be able to find a cold drink. I know I'm going to be able to find a bathroom because there's going to be a Dollar General just pop up out of nowhere. But yeah,
I,
that there was something that I remember Joel saying in many of his speaking engagements and in his books about kids leaving the land and parents ushering kids off the land. And it sounds like you're part of a movement that wants to change that attitude because there's all these people back, even when, Joel was growing up in the 70s and they were saying, hey, there's no life for you here. It's hard work with no pay. There's no, it was a complete poverty mindset.
yeah.
And I know I want to help address it, even though I don't have children of my own. I want to help address a very incorrect scenario. So, how do you guys feel you're able to kind of tackle that on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I to kind of go along with what you said before I answer your question. My sons both went to school in Costa Rica in this tiny little one-room schoolhouse, 6 grades, one teacher, and I was at a parent-teacher conference, and the children were there, and she was kind of talking to them all, and she was telling them, you can have a better life than your parents. You don't want to live here. You can get jobs in the city. You can get jobs in technology. You can make money. And just hearing her say that, I was getting like so uncomfortable and frustrated, but I didn't have the Spanish to really say what I wanted to say.
Yeah.
But I would like realize, like, even though they had clean air, clean water, they were they had plenty of food. I mean, those folks knew how to grow enough food for their families and some. I mean, they had pigs in this little tiny lots. They had all kinds of animals, and they had bananas. I mean, so it was so sad to hear them talking about their parents' life being so trash because they were land rich and profit poor, or cash poor, right? And so that's something that ever since then I knew about that happening because you hear about like these family farms drying up or being bought out or whatever, but that was like an actual first person experience where I was like, I don't like that. And I told my kids about it, and they, I think it's important to, like, for us, okay, for how we're doing it, it's not always easy. My oldest son wants to be a computer engineer and go into like digital finance. I mean, and he grew up on a permaculture farm, and it wasn't like those. I mean, he did do chores and he did work and all that stuff. But I didn't want to like inundate him and make him like feel like it was too hard, right? So it wasn't so bad, but he still wants that. I mean, it's hard to compete with all the entertainment and the money and the stuff and the materialism of the world. And so I think what we're doing, it's luckily he went to college and a lot of his friends are like, well, that's the coolest thing. Your parents are doing that. And I think so with the generations coming up, creating opportunities for them is one thing, like internships, apprenticeships, educational things, like kind of seeing how it's kind of hip to go back to the land. For us, having a community is really important because one of my goals is that I can create a vibrant community that my son wants to raise his children in. And just like in the Amish, there's this time where the kids have to like go out into the world and see, and then they can compare that and say, whoa, actually this is not what I thought it was. It was like all like bells and whistles, but when I get here they're kind of rusted and breaking apart and I just want to go home. So I think creating a safe, enticing, engaging, and also like the feeling of actual health, like when you're in, like my son just got back, my other son, he just got back from visiting family in Minnesota, and he comes out and we're driving through the mountains, and he's like, oh, I miss nature. And my heart just filled up. I was like, that makes me so happy to hear, because when you actually have a relationship with the land, and in a way that's not just, like I said, not just watching it or observing it, but engaging with it and working it.
Yeah.
And the skills. I mean, that's the other thing. The kids that grow up in this kind of environment, they know how to do all sorts of stuff. They can grow their own food, build their own homes, they know how to milk a goat, whatever it is. They like remember these skills, and they come back to them. So I think showing, like, kind of breaking the illusion that the lifestyle is too hard or not lucrative enough, and coming up with creative ways to build the economy of a farm, to bring in like that. So, because I think there is definitely a feeling of this like poverty consciousness around farming and family farming and sustenance farming. And I think that doesn't have to be there, because so many people want good, healthy food.
Yeah.
So yeah, so being creative, I think, is really important and engaging and fun. With our farm and forest school, kids come here, they learn how to build chicken tractors, plant gardens. They learn how to like identify plants. They learn about water systems and watersheds, and they learn about insects and all the different things, of nature. And so it's like trying to like get them young to understand the value of the land, of the ecosystem, and get hands-on experience in tending to it without the feeling of being. I think a lot of times in the old days, like when families were on farms, the kids were overwhelmed by the work, because there wasn't like there was like a tribe or a community of people doing it. Like here we have adults that want to be here doing it, and then encouraging and bringing the kids in, rather than like being like, okay, you have to do this, or we're going under. Like, I think that's a big shift too.
Yeah. Yeah. And personally, like, I don't think it's fair to pile a whole bunch of worry and concern onto a child, but to, like you were kind of saying, to make it rewarding, make it fun and interesting and engaging for them, and let the adults worry about the money and the finances and all that. We had some beef cattle up here when I was growing up, and I personally, even though I wasn't really engaged with it, I would go out and like help dad when he was going to take hay to him in the wintertime, and that sort of thing. And I remember we had a bottle calf at one point. My brother and I kind of learned how to park ourselves in the corner of the corral and hold the bottle so that the calf could nurse. Mm-hmm. And I remember being like having a sense of pride about that. And when I went to high school, there were still enough farming families around and enough of us who were growing up on farms that it really wasn't weird or made fun of. The whole, like, the farming culture and the suburban culture were kind of more or less balanced at the time. Mm-hmm. And there were a bunch of kids, the Butler kids, who were all offspring of the local farm veterinarian. So, we're always hearing stories about, Doc Butler taking care of an injured animal or something like that. So, mm-hmm. And we always had a sense of pride about it. There wasn't anything shameful, but we were also like pretty middle class. Like, there was definitely like a class distinction between that and people who maybe were living in a mobile home and they had chickens in the backyard because they needed the eggs and they needed the chickens. Like, there was a discernible kind of class divide. I do remember wanting to make sure I never ever smelled bad going to school. Like, I didn't want to smell like I had cow poop on my shoes or something like that. Because, of course, high school, the whole the culture, those teenage years. But I am so glad for what you guys are doing out there. If you'd like, go ahead and let folks know how they can keep up with what you're up to, how to get in touch with you, the services you offer. We don't worry about competition around here. We're all here backing each other up on this whole design and the big picture. So go ahead and relay all that, please.
Yeah, cooperation versus competition. We, just like all the cells in our body work together to form us, and all life, that's how we thrive as a community, is through cooperation and mutual benefit, right? So you can find me. Thank you. You can find me on Facebook, I'm Alana Bliss. You can email me at missalanabliss@proton.me. We also have a website that talks about our church, which is called Regenerative Life Fellowship, and we want to make a safe space for people of all faiths to come together and learn about regenerative living. So that's another place, and that's regenerativelife.fellowship.org. And then, I think those Grow, Gathering Roots of Wisdom on Facebook is another place that you can see what we're doing. This week coming up this next week, we've got a healer in the home, and also we're calling it Rewilding Immersion Camp. And so for the adults, it's healer in the home, and you learn how to, deal with acute issues. So first aid stuff and things like that. And then for adults, and then the kids have a bushcrafting camp at the same time. So there's still availabilities for that. So if you're interested, let me know. And then we have a farm and forest school that is twice a week right now, Mondays and Wednesdays. It's a 5-hour drop-off program, but parents are welcome to stay. And we've got some tents and things that we do that with them. And and I also do design work. So if anyone is interested in doing, like having a permaculture designer come out and check out your land. And I love it. If I do that, though, I am not good at the details of the plants and things. So that's where I would call up here on Carrie to support with some of those things. Because I recognize patterns, because in permaculture, all landscapes have similar patterns, right? But the details, the specific species vary. And I know some, but I'm still learning. So that
could be a lot of fun, actually. And if you guys would like me to come out to your spot at some point and kind of get you some more details out there, I'd be more than happy to do that.
That'd be great, because what I'm seeing on our land is a lot of pine forest. It looks like they clear cut, and actually the guy who had it before has said that they wanted to make a lake where our property is, but the dam broke like twice. And so they clear cut it to make the dam, and now the secondary forest is coming up under the pines. And so it's interesting to see. Yeah, I would love to check that out. It would be great to have you out.
Yeah, we need to get that on the calendar for sure.
Yes, definitely. Well, I really appreciate having this conversation, and maybe we can do more, and I can learn a little bit more about Southern culture and some of the strengths that it holds, because I'm such a novice.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. And if you want to hold tight for just a second, I'll wrap us up here. Just wanted to drop in real quick and thank Margot and Pinkies and Pippin Eyes and Off Grid Ping and Vine Permaculture for hanging out in the chat. Always appreciate it that you guys spend a little bit of time with us. If I can help you all with anything, just holler at me, strongrootsresources@gmail.com. And we will catch you guys next week, if not sooner. Y'all have a good one.